Good morning, everyone. We're moving through guidelines for members of the Ananda Sevaka order, which we're calling the Ananda Way of Life. We're at the very end of Article 2 out of 16. What is community life? We'll probably, well, I won't promise whether we'll finish or not, so we'll see. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence within us. Lift us above the confusion of this world. Help us to know ourselves as we truly are, bubbles in the great ocean of spirit, riding the waves of never-ending change. Give us the strength to be deeply centered within ourselves and to view this world as you see it, each of us moving inevitably, drawn by your love to our perfect home in thee. Om, peace. Amen. Okay, yesterday I mentioned it was June 1st yesterday. Today is June 2nd. Oh, June 2nd is my mother's birthday. She passed away 20 years ago, but this was her birth anniversary. Yesterday was my 50th anniversary of the day that I took up residence at Ananda Village, and I've resided in an Ananda community continuously since then, except for a couple of years interim when we first moved here. Before this community was founded, we had an ashram house, but we didn't have a community. So I'm starting my second century, second half of the century. That's what I realized today. I've crossed the mid-century mark. Time is very different than we think it is. All right, my friends, we're in the last two paragraphs here. So we've been talking about loyalty, negativity, what to do when you have a difference of opinion, just many absolutely splendidly wonderful things. So, let me I scribbled some notes here. I just want to see. So Swami now is talking about how we keep our hearts open to our brothers and sisters and to our family, even when we see limitations in them. And that is really the essence of what this whole section is about, which is learning how to love completely and how to be committed completely, how to be constantly supportive and a true friend, even when we perceive that people have glaring weaknesses. And I hadn't actually thought of it just like that, but I think that's a lot of what Swami's coming to, and that's what this last paragraph summarizes. Let me read the paragraph first, then I'll say the things I was thinking. Does one, for instance, for the imperfections that he may observe in his own mother, hold himself aloof from her? She is his mother, after all, her human shortcomings notwithstanding. When there is love, a person's deepest awareness will always be of the causes for unity, not for disunity. What I love about the privilege that I've been given, which is to try to explain all these things to other people, is that I actually learn. I have read that paragraph over and over again, and I actually am finally just understanding it. And I'll try to share that understanding. Give me a moment. I always also, it's so funny how the prejudices of one's own mind keep confuse our perception. Swami had a very saintly mother, Gertrude Walters. I had the privilege of knowing her, and even for one period of time when her husband had a heart attack, and they were unable to take care. They'd been living independently in their own beautiful home, and then her husband Ray had a heart attack, and he became diminished, and they couldn't maintain themselves on their own. And like many older couples, they were quite reluctant to bring in strangers, and no one in their biological family was free to take care of them. And so Swami asked me to go live with them for what turned out to be about 6 weeks. I was kind of a semi-member of the family because Swamiji never had any biological children. There were a few of us who knew his parents, and they accepted us as if we were his children. In fact, his father, who was so extremely fair-minded, realized at a certain point that of his 3 sons, Swamiji was the only one who didn't have biological children. And when he'd made out his will, he had willed a portion of his estate to the biological children of his sons if the sons had passed away, had predeceased him, is the elegant word that they use in the legal trade. But he hadn't made such arrangements for Swamiji. So he asked Swamiji to name several of us who would have the same position in the inheritance that his biological grandchildren were. It was an extremely generous and a fair distribution. Ray was always exceedingly fair. So I actually went and lived in the house for 6 weeks, and then Swamiji asked Vairagi, and she actually lived with them, I think, for 2 years. And just on Swami's behalf, she took care of his parents, which was, of course, a great honor for her. So we all got to know they were very fine people, and his mother especially was exceedingly saintly. And Swami and she had a particular connection. When I was writing my first book about Swamiji, I interviewed some of his friends, childhood friends, and there was this woman who was the daughter of Ray's business partner, as professional partner, as well as being a friend. And she lived with the family for a period of time because her mother became ill. And she talked about the unique connection that Swami had with his mother, and that the whole family, she said, was aristocratic. But Swamiji and his mother were royal. She was like the queen and he was the prince. And whenever they were together, she said, there was a particular aura around them that they didn't try to exclude others, but they were able to share something that no one else in the family really had. The way the family, this girl told me about it, that she was, of course, a grown woman by then. She said, Swami's brother, who was a friend of hers, she said, with him, we'd talk about what the other kids were doing in school, who was dating who, how the football team was doing. She said, with Don, as she called him, you never talked about trivial things. With him, you only talked about serious matters, because that was just the way he was. He didn't have any interest in trivial things. So whenever I read this, does one, for instance, for the imperfections that he may observe in his own mother, hold himself aloof from her? In Swami's way of thinking, it was unthinkable because of the mother he had, and just because of the way he perceived mothers. Every time I read that, I think about some of the horror stories I've heard of terrible parenting and how many people do hold themselves aloof from their mothers, and sometimes with very good cause, because of the imperfections that are present there. That's always prevented me, every time I've read this paragraph, which is countless times, I always put Swami's unique situation into the equation. So I'm saying several things here. One is just sharing with you the unique relationship he had with his mother, but also I'm observing for the millionth time how we can only see what we can see. because the limits of our own consciousness, and even more, our likes, our dislikes, our prejudices, our conditioning, just make it hard for us to see things objectively. In the last few days, I've been talking to friends who are visiting and just talking about various situations that we deal with, and I've become intensely aware of how once you have an emotional bias, I'm capable, I'm rational enough to see the facts of a situation, even when I have, even in this case, even though I have a bias. But I can still feel the bias. I can feel it just clouding things. And that's why Swamiji was so brilliant, is because he could step outside any bias and just see things as they are. Now, having said all of that, the last line here is really what Swami's trying to say. The first lines are illustrating it. When there is love, a person's deepest awareness will always be of the causes for unity, not for disunity. And this whole subject is actually not at all about biological family. It's exactly the opposite. It's trying to take the commitment and the sense of self-definition and identity and interdependence that we associate with the biological family and actually raise it to an even higher octave, which is that spiritual unity. In the course of talking about this, I've often mentioned, and I say it jokingly, but that spiritual family is much worse than biological family, because biological family you can escape by dying, because once you get rid of that body, the body is the biology that defines the relationships. It might not define the true karmic connection, but it defines what we're talking about now. But spiritual family, death is no freedom, because we're just going to see each other in the astral world and reincarnate again, and we have to keep doing it again and again. As Swami wrote, as I mentioned, in The Path, he wrote that we have to spiritualize our relationship to God, of course, but also with the objective world, primarily through our interactions with one another as a spiritual family. Everything in the human world is a symbol of deeper realities that's so hard for us to understand, because the physical world seems so big, and our experience of the spiritual, the non-physical world, for most of us is a bit embryonic compared to our experience of the material world. The material world just comes right through the senses and we can see it. And I know that I can get on a plane and fly for 16 hours and get off in a wholly new reality in some other part of the world, on the other side of the world, which gives me the impression that the material world is real big. It's just real big, and there's all this stuff going on. So to hear, which the masters say, that the material world is symbolic of the true reality, and that master described the material plane, he described like a big hot air balloon with the little gondola basket underneath it. It's an image all of us have probably seen. The balloon that's full of the hot air that enables it to rise is huge, and the gondola is very small by comparison. A friend of mine actually had a business with hot air balloons, so I had the opportunity to ride in it, but I also had the opportunity to see it up close. And it is huge, and the gondola is so tiny. And when you're in it, you're so tiny compared to the bigness of it. And Master used that to give us some idea. The material plane is like the gondola, and the astral worlds, or the balloon, and that doesn't even begin to describe it. But everything here is a symbol to teach us something more real. The biological family is a symbol to begin to teach us about true soul union, which is what comes when we're united with shared ideals. When I wrote loved and protected stories of miracles and answered prayers, which I profoundly and deeply recommend the book to you. The fact that I was the one who compiled and articulated the stories is entirely incidental. The book is the story of countless other people's experiences of divine intervention. And I just have to use the word, it's thrilling. The book is absolutely thrilling. I've read it cover to cover several times. And every time I finish reading it, I just wish it would go on forever because the stories are thrilling. Swamiji asked me to write that book. Well, actually, I told might be more like the word. He started writing it himself. He thought it was very important to document, to give people hope of God's intervention. It seemed like an odd book for him to write. He started collecting the stories. He never went very far with it. And then he literally showed up at my house and handed me the heap of paper and said, I'm not going to write this, you write it. So I didn't have much choice. And thank you. That I didn't have any choice, because what happened was it was the second book of personal experiences, of people's personal experiences I wrote. First was the book about Swami Kriyananda, so I knew how it had to be done. So I made arrangements to travel. Almost all the stories are from Ananda people. I traveled to several of our centers and made appointments and just sat with people and invited people to tell me their stories. The opportunity to sit with someone and look into their eyes, looking into people's eyes was a big part of it, and have them talk to me about some of the most important things that ever happened to them in their lives, and just being able to receive not only the information but the vibration, to see the light that would come into their eyes as they would talk about these things, and to realize how very different people are on the inside from what you may see on the outside. Sometimes it was a factor of age. One of the most entertaining experiences I had this way was this quintessential little old lady. You know, she was diminutive. She was a bit typical in the way she dressed, little old lady-ish slightly. She had curly white hair, you know, just like everything. I don't know if her eyes were blue, but they might have been, you know, big eyes like this. And she'd had a rather raucous youth, is the only way I can put it. Multiple marriages, addiction issues. She was, as I recall, the first woman to be a jockey in California. She'd made her life through horses. And, you know, that's a colorful scene, all this. And here she is, you know, with her little teacup and her little white hair. And I got a God's eye view of people, because they would be talking to me about their relationship with God. I got a God's eye view of people. And what happens when you see people as they really are is that you can't help but love them. Because we're all really so much the same. We're all just trying to do the best that we can do. This last year and a half in California, where I live, people have been very faithful to wearing masks. And within our Ananda community, we've all been very careful, and as a result have had no cases within our own community here in Palo Alto. And so what happens is I've had to have a lot of conversations with people where basically the whole face is covered, and I myself sewed hundreds of these masks and passed them out. The ones I sewed were particularly large and spacious, so they covered your whole face and down even under your chin, you know, just so they were totally covered. So really, the only human thing you were looking at was people's eyes. And because I've wanted to relate to people, I've had lots of conversations just looking into people's eyes. And it's been the closest thing to the experience I had when I was making the book about love, answered prayers, because I never realized the degree to which the rest of a person's face really distracted me from their eyes, even though I've always looked into people's eyes when I talk. It's just a habit of mine. But then people became nothing but their eyes. And the longer you just stare at someone's eyes when they have no face, and I mean this in a positive way, they become somewhat non-human. Because what you think of as a human face, you're not looking at it anymore. You're just looking at these two little orbs. And that becomes the conduit for this tremendous energy. And once again, when you feel people on that level, well, many things are happening. But one of the things that's happening is it's our physical bodies that continually emphasize the fact that I am different from you. We have, we may be opposite biological genders. We can be different chronological ages. We can have skin color, eye color, facial features, life history, just all of these things. And having a very active mind, I often have all of those things happening simultaneously. But when a tremendous amount of the visual input was taken away, and we're just dealing with the flow of energy, we move out of what separates us and profoundly into what unites us. This is the great secret of life, that human beings are like the fingers of one hand, and when we stand at the tip and look across the space between us, we become very conscious of the space between us. But if we go deep into the origin point, we find that all those separate entities actually are unified. When you're in the palm of your hand, there's only one reality. What defines each finger? You have no idea, because the origin point is blended all together. So that's how divine love expresses itself. It's a spontaneous response to this awareness of our similarities. I remember a guest came to our retreat and met Swami Kriyananda there, and after a few days of being there, he came to Swamiji, and he had tears in his eyes, and he was also bewildered. He was somewhat bewildered. He said, you, and not just Swami, but all the people that he'd met there, you hardly know me. He said, I'm here for the first time. I've been here for a few days, but I feel more loved by the people here than I feel from my own family. He said, my own family has known me my entire life. He said, we've had a few days together. And he was confused and said to Swami, you don't even know me. How is that possible? Because we tend to think of love as something that's earned. Or, that I am, either it's owed because I'm your son or your daughter or your spouse, and you have to love me, and therefore it comes out of the conditions, or it's earned because I'm a good son or I'm a good husband, and therefore I've earned that love from you. But there was no possibility of having earned it. How is that possible? You don't even know me. And Swami, first he agreed. He said, you're right. I'm not sure Swami even knew his name. You're right. He said, I don't know you like your family knows you. They have all this experience and information and knowledge of your character, of your life. He said that I don't have it all. He said, but when I look at you, Swami said, but when I look at you, I see God within you. I see God within you, and I already love God. So it's very easy for me to love you. It was just, isn't that a perfect answer? And so the same love that we offer to the divine, and that love is spontaneous from our own hearts, from the experiences that we have in meditation and in service, we begin to know that the divine is omnipresent. So when somebody arrives, and I believe Swami also said that, it's like, I don't know the details of you, but I know you. I know who you really are. You are a manifestation of the divine. And since I've already given my heart to God in all his forms, I'm just being introduced to one more form of God. I don't have to get to know it because I already know it. Now, it's a very different kind of love because it's called unconditional. And that doesn't mean, and this is important to bear in mind, that you don't treat people appropriately. I mean, when you know someone from their origin point, and I'll use Swami as the example, you automatically know what would be helpful to them. You automatically know intuitively how to respond appropriately. So Swamiji wasn't always, I was going to use the word nice. I often joke about this. There are 8 manifestations of God, and nice is not one of them. You can be kind, meaning you're kind because you're responding appropriately for that person's highest good. But that doesn't mean that you're always nice, because sometimes the appropriate response is, no, I'm not going to allow that because it's not helpful to you, and therefore I'm not going to allow it. So coming all the way back to this, where Swami says, when there is love, a person's deepest awareness will always be of the causes for unity, not disunity. So when we take this whole picture and apply it to the spiritual family, the bonds among the spiritual family are not because of culture, biology, shared experience necessarily, although that does also come, but it's because all of us are focused on lifting our consciousness toward the divine, and all of us are there to help each other lift our consciousness to the divine. And when that sincerity is there, as I discovered when I was doing that, collecting those stories, there's this divine greatness in people. And you not only spontaneously love it, but there's also deep respect, deep respect. From doing that book, I also began to realize how differently God evaluates us. Because some of the people I talk to, there are people who are part of Ananda, who in several cases particularly, people I talk to, they had departed from the ashram, sometimes even for 15 or 20 years, and in some cases had some very hard experiences, but then remembered and came back. So if I looked at the whole face, I was looking at someone who'd had some rough days and nights. But they were clinging, they were holding on, and they realized that loving God was still the answer. And they were not significant by any worldly measure, but they were brilliant in the eyes of God, because they'd faced and gone through all of these hard times, and they were still there. They were still present, loving God. And you can't help but just open your heart to that. And this is where Swami says, it's so simple. Where love is present, you automatically see reasons to remain unified rather than to separate yourself and reject. And so you don't have to try. It's just automatically how you feel. So this then, and this is what I understand about this section, about, you talk about loyalty and negativity and treachery, but the answer to all of it is to see God in one another and to love that God. And then your biases will work for you. You'll automatically be seeing and feeling the reasons why we want to cling together instead of separating ourselves. And with that consciousness, Divine Mother will also bring solutions. God bless you, my friends.